Again, temperatures likely to be close to average come the afternoon. Feeling pleasant if you get a bit of sunshine, but not feeling too clever if you're stuck with the cloud and the outbreaks of rain. The changeable theme continues into the weekend.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hey, welcome along to the Mark Steyn Show, where the hits just keep on coming. Do you like country music?
Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. Don't let them pick guitars and drive them old trucks.
Personally, I'm relaxed about my babies growing up to be cowboys, but mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be fact checkers. It's a new phony baloney profession passing itself off as a priesthood. Our statsman, Jamie Jenkins, and Dr. Aseem Malhotra will have a few things to say about that. And do you think we should do something about all those migrants on the southern shore every night? Well, you're entitled to your opinion. As we used to say, though oddly that expression seems to have dropped out of favour in the last couple of decades, you entitle your opinion, but unfortunately we're going to have to freeze your bank account. So you'll get your opinion, but you'll be broke. Alexandra Marshall and Andrew Lawton are here on that one. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be bank account freezers. The good news is that you may be so broke there's nothing in your frozen bank account to seize, because the UK economy is sailing into some seriously choppy waters. Jasmine Buttles is in the crow's nest for us. Safe harbour ahoy! Well, it's a long way away, if there is one. We will try to stay focused on stuff that matters over the next hour, plus the most important part of the show. That's you. Email me. gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. GB News is the People's Channel, and we love to hear from the people, because if we don't, it means we're doing it wrong. It's all coming your way after Polly Middlehurst with the latest news. All yours, Polly.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good evening to you. The Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continues to defend her government's economic plan. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader at her first PMQs since the Chancellor unveiled his mini-budget. Sir Keir Starmer labelled Kwasi Kwarteng's plans madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil. And he called on the government to reverse what he started to call the kamikaze budget. This evening, King Charles and Prime Minister Liz Truss held their first weekly audience at Buckingham Palace. And the Bank of England has confirmed its emergency bond buying scheme will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week to make sure they can withstand any market turmoil. The bank had been forced to intervene amid the continuing fallout over the Chancellor's mini-budget. The Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, says the Bank of England can effectively deal with any inflation. In other news today, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has expressed his frustration at environmental campaigners holding protests in London in recent days. On a post on social media, Mark Rowley said more than 200 officers were daily involved in protests held in the capital, and he wrote there'd been 338 arrests in the last 11 days. Earlier today, Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil staged protests outside Parliament and Downing Street. The Metropolitan Police will start using data to predict which men in London might be violent towards women and girls. The Met Commissioner says the force is working with a data network of men in the capital to forecast who could commit violent crimes against the opposite sex. Sir Mark Rowley has told a policing conference today that he wants to use the information, which is based on previous behaviour, to stop offenders before they commit crimes. And detectives looking for a woman who went missing 3 years ago have launched a murder inquiry after finding human remains. 19-year-old Leah Croucher was last seen on CCTV walking to work in Milton Keynes in February 2019. Thames Valley Police are searching a property where items belonging to her, including a rucksack, have been found following a tip-off from the general public. It says specialist teams will remain at the property for a significant period of time. International news, and in Ukraine, the brother of the mayor of Kyiv says Russia's president is deliberately targeting civilians. This Monday, several areas of Ukraine, including the capital Kyiv, were targeted by Russian airstrikes, leaving at least 26 people dead and dozens more injured. Ukrainian former heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko said President Putin is targeting civilian infrastructure to make up for his losses on the battlefield.
Russia, Putin in this case, is the leader of the country, trying to put us all on the knee so we freeze, we have no food, and try to dictate what we actually want to do and how we're supposed to live. And that's the strategy and tactic of Russia in this case, because on the front line, they don't have success.
Vladimir Klitschko. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, you're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Mark Steyn.
Did I hear that right, Polly? The Metropolitan Police got some app that predicts which men are going to be violent? I'm not sure about that. Sounds a bit like, was that Philip K. Dick, the thing about pre-crime? It sounds a bit iffy to me, that. As we often have cause to remark, nothing works anymore, as you'll know if you tried booking a doctor's appointment or checking your bags at Heathrow. I suggested a few months back that it wouldn't be long before the planes are dropping out of the sky. We're not there yet, but have a look at this Boeing Dreamlifter taking off from Taranto Airport in southern Italy, bound for America. Here she goes. Let's take a look at this. There, the plane has liftoff. It's just taken off the Dream Lifter, and oh, one of the wheels falls off. Boom! And it's bouncing along the ground like the dead cat bounce of Talk TV's relaunched primetime schedule ratings. I fight the urge to be too obvious about the cheap symbolism, but the wheels are literally coming off now. At one time, other nations looked to the English-speaking world, America and the British dominions, with envy for their steadiness and prudence compared to the turmoil that roiled almost all the other great powers over the decades. France, Germany, Russia. Not anymore. Chilton Williamson Jr. has a good line in The Spectator. Quote, "The proper business of politics in a democracy is politics as it is understood in a political democracy, not a social democracy." That's what they have on the continent. Politics as it was practiced in the Anglo-Saxon countries before the Great War, when politicians understood government as national housekeeping and defence, rather than as a project for mobilising the whole of society in order to perfect it. The pursuit of perfectibility has wrecked the Anglosphere. Net zero leads naturally to zero COVID, to burning down the entire village in order to save it. 12,000 years of farming has to end in order to lower sea levels in the Maldives a century from now. And this is from the same elites who can't run a health service that can get an ambulance to you within the same business day. Look at that. Patient waited 62 hours for ambulance. These are the same elites who tell you that the approach of winter means the fetish masks will have to come back. Masks maybe, if COVID, the new subvariant is on its way, have to get the masks out. These are the same elites who insist they have to restrain your movements, your freedom to operate your business, to let your children play with their friends, to visit your granny in her ludicrously misnamed care home, even as they open the nation's doors to 1,000 people a night whose state of contagion is entirely unknown, but they get to be put up at a stately home and get 2 appointments with a GP per week. The economic ruination of the United Kingdom is not some random cyclical upturn and downturn event. It is the consequence of public policy. You close down the business of the nation and pay people to stay at home, and you're surprised there's double-digit inflation? Prudence. Prudence, dear Prudence, as the Beatles used to sing, is the essence of statecraft, but we have nothing but imprudence all around. It is imprudent to have open borders. It is imprudent to abolish biological sex. It is imprudent to jab children with an experimental vaccine for a disease that is no threat to them. It is imprudent for the global superpower to spend trillions of dollars that it does not have. Once upon a time, not that long ago, trillion was a number used only by astronomers to calculate the mileage to distant galaxies. It had no practical use down on Earth. It took America over 2 centuries to rack up its first $1 trillion in debt. By the dawn of the new millennium, that was up to $5 trillion. The money, no object war on terror era doubled it to $10 trillion by the end of the Bush years. Obama doubled it again to $20 trillion. Then came COVID, and America piled on another $10 trillion just in the last couple of years. So the government of the United States, look at this. This is their live debt calculator. That's the federal debt up in the top left-hand corner. It's 31 trillion and change. The United States has to pay back $31 trillion just to get back to having nothing, nada, zero, not a dime in its pocket. Nobody in human history has ever done that, and there is no reason to believe those guys in Washington are going to be the first to do it. In 7 months, they've given just under $70 billion, which is more than the entire Russian military budget, to the most corrupt country in Europe. Bookkeeping. Ukraine, I love Ukraine mainly for the women. They're fabulous. But it is not the country you'd go to for precise bookkeeping. So they have no idea where this $70 billion has gone, because in the great sucking maw of the United States government, spending $70 billion is just a rounding error. There's nothing holding America up, but because the dollar is the global reserve currency, the rest of the West has to keep pretending that there is. The ruination all around comes from multiple factors, but one is the groupthink. The supposedly conservative government agrees as a practical matter on 90% of stuff with the supposedly Labour opposition. And the media agree too. And anyone who doesn't agree gets shut down. Fortunately, that's not going to happen to this show. Oh, wait. Breaking news from Ofcom. We have opened an investigation into the GBNews Mark Steyn programme, aired on 4th of October 2022 at 8 o'clock. My, oh my. The author, Neil Clark, responds. Ofcom needs to be abolished. It is used in a pernicious way to clamp down on free speech and media pluralism. What's the line from House of Cards? You might very well say that, but I couldn't possibly comment. More to the point, you might very well say that, Neil, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to say so on UK telly. We will get into various aspects of all this stuff with Dr. Aseem Malhotra, Alexandra Marshall, Jamie Jenkins and Andrew Lawton, but let us start with economic ruination. The UK economy contracted by 1/3 of a point in August. That's quite big for a single month. And then the following month, the nation came to a halt to mourn Her late Majesty. So I would be surprised if September's figures were any great shakes. Meanwhile, we have QE. That's not Queen Elizabeth, but quantitative easing, which is not helping the Bank of England and the new government align themselves. Let's explore that with Jasmine Birtles from the Money Magpie. Jasmine, just explain in layman's terms what quantitative easing actually is and whether it's now come and gone.
Well, yes, because it sounds like, well, goodness knows, it sounds like some sort of medical experiment. But what quantitative easing is, in as you say, layman's terms, is essentially money printing. Even though we don't actually print very much money, you could say it's digitally printing money. It used to be years ago, really decades ago, that we had a gold standard. So you had money that was printed according to, allegedly, according to the amount of gold that we had in our reserves. But that went about 100 years ago, certainly in this country. It went in the 70s in America. And since then, really, there's been nothing solid, nothing really solid. I mean, people would argue against this, but I consider there's been nothing really solid against which you could put the pounds that we have printed. It's become what they call fiat money. So fiat, as you know, is a statement. So the government says that's worth that, that's worth a pound, etc. And we all go, oh, all right then. But there's nothing really solid backing it other than a sort of a vague sense of how the country is doing. But of course, you know, even if you put something like that vague sense of how the country is doing next to the value of the pound, that's not really a lot right at the moment.
No, and that's actually the issue here, isn't it? That just looking around you, things seem to be kind of bad. I mean, we have right now at the moment, well, we had pestilence with COVID, we have war in Ukraine, we have famine with all these food shortages from the breadbasket of Europe. So 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are already in town. Is underneath all the happy talk, can the mess that's been made be untangled?
Oh, good gracious. I think it's going to take a while to untangle it because, I mean, you went through many of the reasons here, as you said, this sort of daft sense of perfectibility where you have to have zero COVID, you have to have zero carbon, and the authoritarianism, I think, that is behind this. And as you've also pointed out, this is underpinned, if you can call it that, by hot air. And as you've mentioned with the quantitative easing, that's printing of money to the max, so that the more you print this money, the less it's worth. And you could say that it's the same with quite a lot of the edicts that we're getting from our government, from the European government, from America, from the World Economic Forum. It's all these increasing numbers of edicts and platitudes mean less and less to a populace that is realizing that we've increasingly been lied to. So it's not just our currency that has been devalued, it's the currency of trust in authority, of trust in governments that is increasingly devalued. So they're having to scream louder, I think, to make any sort of inroads in our consciousness now.
No, there used to be expressions that I haven't heard in a very long time, like sound as a pound. Do you remember that one? I don't know that people actually... I think that's yours is the right reaction. I don't think you could say that with a straight face these days. But what I find interesting is that outside the government announces things, and then you have international institutions such as the IMF that seem to be saying, no, you might want to rethink that. That's something new, isn't it? That the government does not even seem to have the freedom to navigate a path out of this.
Well, yes, absolutely. And again, we have similarities here with the World Health Organization, which is still saying that it's going to be telling the rest of the world what to do in the event of some whatever they consider to be a new health emergency, which, you know, could be a whole rash of ingrowing toenails across the world. I don't know. You know, they will decide what is a health emergency, and they will tell us all, you know, what we can and can't do about it. So yes, the IMF likes to tell us and others what to do. You could say, you know, International Monetary Fund, well, that, you know, does what it says on the tin, but still, no, I don't personally think that they have the right to do that. But increasingly, governments seem to feel that they should genuflect to any unaccountable, large, rich global organization that happens to set itself up.
I just want to read an announcement here from GB News Management, Jasmine. We wish to entirely disassociate ourselves from Miss Birtle's flippancy about the new toenail virus sweeping across the planet. We certainly, especially for you people having dinner right now and you're thinking about toenail fungus, that's actually perfectly healthy for you. And Bill Gates has bought up a huge amount of farmland actually to grow artificial toenail fungus for you. So pay no attention to the flippancy of Miss Birtles, because we don't need any more Ofcom complaints. Thank you very much, Jasmine, our toenail correspondent there, Jasmine Birtles. Invest in toenails. It makes much more sense than buying sterling these days. We're going to get to your thoughts next. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Plus, as the old 1920s novelty song puts it, get your ukulele out. Who checks out the fact checker's order while the fact checker's busy checking facts? We'll talk about the fact check racket with Dr. Aseem Malhotra and Jamie Jenkins. Plus, we have our favourite Australian, Alexandra Marshall, and our third favourite Canadian, maybe fifth favourite Canadian, Andrew Lawton. They'll be talking about woke banking coming to a current account near you any moment. Don't touch that dial, we're heading right back.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
GB News is the People's Channel. Let's channel what the people are saying. Mr. Sarcastic, possibly not his real name, says, please elaborate how fact-checking poses a threat to the UK. That's because it only checks in one direction, which is in support of a constrained, narrow, approved narrative. We've had almost 3 years of that now, and everything is bleeped. Nothing works. Nothing works. And in part because the fact checkers, oh, no, can't say anything about the COVID vaccines, can't say anything about transgender pronouns, can't say everything's screwed. So there's maybe 2% of human existence that isn't totally screwed at the moment. If you'd like that to be screwed, keep going down this path. Norman says fact checkers pose the bigger threat to the UK. The IMF are actively trying to take down the work of a government who actually wish to fix the economic problems. Yes, it's odd, isn't it, to secede from the European Union and then find an entirely different bunch of international bodies pushing you around. Susan says, no, it's traitor Truss selling us out on every meeting. This is like, as was discussed earlier with Farage, Liz Truss's enthusiasm for being part of some new Europe-wide military operation. It's not actually called the European Union. It's what's it called? PESCO, which sounds like some sort of powdered gravy pellets you buy in the supermarket. Ah, PESCO. I love putting that pesco on my Sunday roast. OK, I mentioned earlier that Ofcom have announced a new investigation into this show. By the way, they still haven't wrapped up the previous investigation, this from one of our shows in April. So you might like to get off your flabby Ofcom butts and wrap up that investigation, because it really shouldn't take 6 months to investigate a little 1-hour television show, should it? Otherwise, people might get the idea that the process is the punishment, just leaving you hanging out there instead of bringing it to a resolution, Ofcom. What is it they say? Is that in Magna Carta, the right to a speedy trial, or is that in the US Constitution? Evidently, it's not in Ofcom's Constitution. Anyway, Dan tweets to Ofcom. Very interesting tweet from Dan. Good for you, Dan. By the way, if Liz Truss is watching, I want you to make Dan head of Ofcom and fire Michael Grade. Dan says, will you be investigating all the talking heads on the TV that said the vaccines will stop transmission? Pfizer have just admitted they didn't even test for that in trials. You are corrupt. Unquote. That's true, as you saw in the European Parliament yesterday, and we had Rob Roos on yesterday, that Pfizer did not even test for the central defining ingredient of a vaccine, Does it stop transmission of the relevant condition? He has a point. Ofcom doesn't seem eager to investigate, for example, ITV's top-rated show This Morning with the Queue Jumpers.
Well, what's really excellent is, and it's a statistic that I think should be shouted from the rooftops, is that after 12 days from the first vaccination of the AstraZeneca vaccine, you are 100% effective against hospitalisation and death. So, you know, those are the statistics we need to be hearing.
Why haven't we heard that before?
All together now, because it is total crap. Dr. Sarah Kayat was in no position to say that, but she could get away with it because at the start of all this, Ofcom put its thumb on the scale on the side of government propaganda, unsupported by science, but amplified by all the pom-pom girls like the one you just saw. We have had guests on this show, your fellow citizens, damaged by the vaccine with full supporting paperwork. They wanted to go on This Morning with the Queue Jumpers and tell their story, but This Morning with the Queue Jumpers got back to them and cancelled their appearance because they didn't want to get into trouble with Ofcom. The stultifying one-size-fits-all propaganda actually got people killed, which is harmful, not harmful like disinformation can be harmful, but harmful in that your loved ones are dead. Our dear friends Vicky Spitt and Charlotte Wright were widowed in their 30s, as no ladies should have to be, because their young, fit, healthy husbands had no idea of what these vaccines could do. Here is a response to Dr. Kayat from a lady you've seen on this show, Stephen Wright's bereaved mum, Anne. Anne says, quote, "It was lies like this that made our loved ones think that having the jab was the right thing to do, and they died from the jab. I don't know how these people sleep at night." I actually don't know how Ofcom sleep at night, because they presided over a British media culture that has got everything wrong now for almost 3 years. And that should be the thing they should be investigating to ensure it doesn't happen again. Vicky Spitt tweeted a couple of hours back. I think about Vicky a lot. She's got her dogs and her horses, but she misses the love of her life. And she says to Ofcom, "Can I complain about the thousands of times the BBC and ITV told us these vaccines were safe and effective, and yet the AstraZeneca killed my husband? This is real harm." Yes, it is, Vicky, because the harm doesn't get more real than death. Death, because in Britain's constricted media culture, Ofcom only wants you to tell one side of the story. You can't give informed consent, which is the applicable ethical standard here, if you're not informed. If information is being suppressed at the behest of Ofcom and their so-called fact-checkers at Full Fact, these are the guys they recommend. They're first, if you want to check out COVID-19 misinformation, they tell you at their website to go and look it up with Full Fact. The Ofcom, there they are, tools for fact-checking. And they go to Full Fact. Why are they partnering with Full Fact? The Ofcom chairman, Michael Grade, he's changed his name. I don't know what his name is now. It's the Earl of Ofcom or something. Anyway, Michael Grade just told the Royal Television Society that Ofcom should not take sides in the culture war. But Full Fact is a fully armed combatant on one side of the culture war, and that's who Ofcom has appointed as its recommended source for COVID information. Full Fact, fully funded by American billionaires to kill British free speech. Why does a cabal of woke tech billionaires get promoted, as here, by Ofcom? Now, free speech may seem a bit of an abstraction to you, but if you kill free speech, you eventually start to kill people too, as we see in the excess mortality numbers. Or how about Piers Morgan, now trying to walk back his demented viciousness? Look at this. Quote, "Love the idea of COVID vaccine passports for everywhere. Flights, restaurants, clubs, football, gyms, shops, etc. It's time COVID-denying anti-vaxxer loonies had their bull bleep bluff called and bar themselves from going anywhere that responsible citizens go," unquote. That's threatening harm pretty explicitly against an identifiable group of people. By the way, do you need a vaccine passport to watch the Piers Morgan show? It would certainly explain the rating. Meow! Saucer of milk for Catty Steyn. I'm sorry about that. It was a low joke. By the way, for months now, we've asked Michael Grade to come on this show to talk about whether what Ofcom did at the start of all this COVID stuff exceeded its regulatory authority. We never had the courtesy of a reply. So we asked him again this morning, along with Dame Melanie Dawes, Ofcom's chief executive, and this time they got back and gave us the bum's rush, and we were told that they, quote, can't make the requests work at this time. A regulator who operates in darkness, in the shadows, has upgraded itself into a ministry of truth. By the way, I don't care about this complaint. Don't care about this complaint. I'll tell you what I want. I want what I'd managed to pull off in Canada a decade ago, where there was a similar complaint from the, whatever it was, the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And not only did I manage to beat the rap, but I managed to get Her Majesty's Canadian government to repeal the law. And that's what I want here. I don't care about the case one way or another, but I want Ofcom out of the censorship business, because it is unbecoming to a free people to be treated like infants in the Ofcom nursery with nanny grade telling you what you can and can't see on your television or listen to on your radio. On Friday, the Surgeon General, that's the Chief Medical Officer of Florida, announced he was recommending against the vaccines for men aged 18 to 39. Now, for the censors out there, that's a fact. A fact. Florida is recommending men under 40 steer clear of these vaccines. So Dr. Aseem Malhotra reposted it on his Facebook account and probably got suspended. Dr. Malhotra joins me now. Are you still actually suspended from Facebook, Aseem, or are you back on there now?
No, good evening, Mark. Well, initially I was suspended for 24 hours for that particular post, essentially just sharing what the General Surgeon of Florida had said around people between the age of 39 and 18 really not to have the vaccine because of a very clear signal of increase in cardiac arrest in that group. And then today I found out I was suspended for another 3 days because of a post that I put up 2 weeks ago, which was a reference to my peer-reviewed research into correcting the pandemic of misinformation on the COVID-19 vaccine. So, yes, that's where we are at the moment. And to be honest, Mark, I think this really represents, what happened to me just represents a symptom or a microcosm of the system failure that we are currently going through and experiencing, a system that encourages good people to do bad things, a system that puts the private interests of big corporations ahead of patients and public health, a system where the legal entity that is the corporation has too much unchecked power over the media, over social media. And what does that ultimately mean? Well, it means that we aren't just having suppression of free speech, we're having deliberate suppression of the truth. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not just the only one. You know, Facebook actually even called one of the most pivotal, most important stories of the pandemic, which was the BMJ's investigation into fraud alleged by a Pfizer whistleblower. They call that misinformation. In fact, the BMJ editors wrote an editorial where they described Facebook fact-checkers as being incompetent. So what does this mean in terms of Facebook? And we could go into the root causes of it as well. As far as I'm concerned, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg are enemies of democracy. And whenever they are mentioned in any context whatsoever, everybody should know Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, as far as I'm concerned, in fact, they should know they are enemies of democracy. He is an enemy of democracy.
Well, your point, which I think is true, is that people tend to think that these fact-checkers are like the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. They're just a bunch of impartial judges. But in fact, they only fact-check in one direction. And the direction they fact-check in is in the direction of this 2020 vaccine fairy tale, which can no longer be sustained.
Yeah, Marcus, I'm glad you've raised that. So one of the other interesting things I found out, which I wrote about in my paper in the Journal of Insulin Resistance, is Facebook partnered with Merck, drug company Merck, to handle vaccine misinformation on their platform. Now, people need to know about Merck. So Merck is a drug company that is known to have committed fraud, paid almost $1 billion in 2011 for the marketing and the data that they suppressed around its anti-inflammatory drug Vioxx. Now, this was a drug that was promoted as being good for essentially for arthritis or chronic pain like ibuprofen, but ultimately it was found that it had increased cardiovascular risk, and it's estimated that drug killed 60,000 Americans. Now, it wasn't just a mistake. I think what's crucial for people to understand, when the investigation was done, internal emails revealed that scientists at Merck knew when the drug was being rolled out that it was going to cause this problem, but they didn't care. They didn't need to care, Mark, because the legal entity that is the corporation is there to make profit. And I'm not just saying this, you know, we talk about an entity that is anti-human, that is immoral, and according to an expert in his field, Dr. Robert Hare, forensic psychologist, he describes corporations like this as being psychopathic. What does that mean? Deliberately deceiving for profit. So people need to understand what is at the root of this misinformation.
I should say that we put your points about Merck to Merck, and we have not heard back from them. This, by the way, is the regime that Ofcom and others support. It's very difficult to actually, when someone makes points such as you have made, to say, oh, fine, let's have the chairman of Merck on and hear what he has to say about it, because those guys don't want to be out there discussing things in the open. They're just like Michael Grade at Ofcom. They turn down any invitation to discuss this stuff out in the open. Now, how long can this be sustained? You saw the exchange in the European Parliament yesterday. I mean, basically, it's a house of cards, and the cards are falling day by day.
Absolutely, Mark. I don't think it can be sustained for much longer. I think the bubble is about to burst, and I think, you know, the information is spreading. I think GBNews has been at the forefront, certainly in this country, to allow this open debate to happen. But you can see in the real world, I see from patients, colleagues contacting me now, people are aware there's a big problem, certainly with the mRNA vaccines. We know that the efficacy, certainly for Omicron, is very, very poor in terms of preventing COVID death. And we know that as you've alluded to on this show many times, vaccine injuries are real, they are serious, they are not rare. And from my own analysis, by the way, we're talking about the highest quality level of data. This is Pfizer and Moderna's own trials suggesting that the original, in the RCT, that one was more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from taking the vaccine and one was to be hospitalized with COVID. And by the way, let me remind you, that was during the original Wuhan strain. So the situation is likely far worse. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a no-brainer, it's unequivocal. There's no legs to stand on from any public health authority to say that we should continue with this vaccine rollout without informed consent. It needs to be suspended and there needs to be a full public inquiry.
Yep, absolutely. And the public are beginning to pick up on this too. So Ofcom are actually imposing a narrative that is not supported by the British people. Thank you very much, Doctor. It's always great to see you. We have another guy who's been supposedly fact-checked. He's our stats man, Jamie Jenkins, who was here a week ago talking about the government's excess mortality figures for August. Now, excess mortality, in layman's terms, which we're very big on in tonight's show, means a big pile of corpses. Look at that. There's the graveyard. There's no room in it because the big pile of corpses is bigger than it ought to be. That ought to be the news. Dead bodies. Lots of dead bodies. Why are they dead? But in fact-check world, that's unimportant. Jamie Jenkins joins us. Jamie, what did you make of being on the receiving end of this? First of all, who are these guys who did the fact-check of you?
Yeah, good evening, Mark. Well, it's a company called Logically, and Logically, I've never even heard of them either. It's they haven't got a huge following on kind of Twitter, and I was alerted. Somebody messaged me on Facebook because I posted the interview that we did a couple of weeks ago, and never heard of this company. But kind of the power they have is that somebody messaged me to say that the interview that we did had been fact checked by independent fact checkers apparently, and all the information in it was false. So I thought, okay, I'll take a look at this myself. And I've done many fact checks myself, Mark. I think one of the reasons I was on originally with you on the show is looking at some of the things
you
that
fact-checked
you
me.
had said, and you fact-checked you, and rather than you ignore it, you kind of got me on the show. We had a good debate about the facts and the figures. I was fact-checking Boris Johnson and Dean Doris last year. They were all saying the vast majority of patients in intensive care were unvaccinated, and it was absolute nonsense at the time. So I haven't got a problem with being fact-checked myself, all the stuff I put out. But I got a problem when these so-called fact-checkers, Mark, start fact-checking the wrong facts and putting out misinformation themselves. So the claim that we were talking about, just for the listeners on the radio and the viewers on the TV, is that in August in 2022, so recently, we've seen the highest death rate of any August for the last 15 years. Now, if you look at the data, it's all on my Twitter feed. I used to manage the team who published this at the ONS. There's not many people in the country that know their way around the ONS data as well as I do. So I posted all the links to this data. It's quite factually there. It is the highest death rate we've seen in 2022 for the last 15 years when you're looking at kind of the central estimate. And what they did is they fact-checked the wrong fact to start with. They went to the ONS and asked them about mortality across the whole of 2022. We weren't even talking about that. So first tip, Mark, if anybody is going to start doing a career in fact-checking, check the correct fact. So that was the first mistake. Second thing, which not only you've been covering, now we've seen it across many different shows, different newspapers as well, that they claim, and I quote, they said there's no indication of a concerning trend of excess deaths. Now, I have no idea what data they're looking at, because this is all over the place. We've seen excess deaths for 20 weeks across the country, 22 weeks probably, in fact, now. So a fact-checking company, my post is labelled on Twitter as false, not borne out by the facts. All I can say to Logically, I've emailed them to kind of get this corrected and asked them, I said, I'm seeking legal advice on this. They are talking absolute nonsense.
Okay.
Their fact-check is false themselves.
Well, Sue, I hope you do sue their flabby asses off. You said something to me which I think is actually quite interesting, which is you think that a lot of this is that they, whoever they are trying to get us used to accepting this higher level of deaths, actually, and a lot of deaths among the young and middle-aged, as a normal, permanent feature of life.
Well, indeed, and the facts are, Mark, over the long term, we've seen improvements in mortality. The COVID pandemic itself has seen higher than expected deaths than what you would have thought, for the time if the pandemic hadn't hit. But the story of the last 20 weeks, Mark, is when you do take those COVID deaths out, because we did have a mini wave through the summer, is that you can't deny the figures that, in particular, people between the ages of 40 and 60, the number of deaths are much higher than what you would expect. Now, the numbers I'm putting out, actually, Mark, are lower than what the ONS actually say themselves. And they're saying my numbers are wrong. The numbers are slightly lower because I'm accounting for the fact that we have more older people in the population. And these amateurs who are checking things out, it all comes back to who checks these fact checkers, because I've looked at Facebook, Mark, and I can't even kind of correct what's going on because there's no button to say, this is actually nonsense.
No, who fact-checks the fact-checkers? Jamie is totally responsible. He always adjusts the numbers, the comparative numbers, to take account of our ageing population. But when you do all that, you're left with the fact that young and middle-aged people are dying in numbers that ought to attract the attention. Unfortunately, Ofcom and Full Fact and all these guys would rather we just shut up about it. Thank you very much, Jamie. It's always good to see you. From Ofcom putting its thumb on the scale to the fact-checkers of social media, who appointed them? What's next? How about vaporizing your bank account because you hold the wrong opinion? Alexandra Marshall and Andrew Lawton are coming up on that. Don't go anywhere. There's Alexandra, my favourite Australian, and Andrew, who's since fallen to my 12th favourite Canadian. So we'll get to them in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
The most moronic fact check of the week surely comes from the zombies at Verify This. The official fact checkers of Verify This say that reports that PayPal is planning to fine customers $2,500 every time they, quote, promote disinformation are false. Why are they false? Oh, because PayPal has now withdrawn the threat following blowback from all those false reports and the collapse of its stock price by 6%. Alexandra Marshall from Down Under and Andrew Lawton from the Great White North join me. Alexandra, how do you feel the week's gone for PayPal?
Well, I know the word Orwellian gets thrown around a lot, but this was certainly an Orwellian week led by PayPal. Now, this is not PayPal's first rodeo. They have done some pretty appalling things to their customers in the past, but this was definitely the first time they suggested theft, just outright theft from their customer base. And it went about as poorly as you would expect, which was a massive walkout and a whole little rewriting of the narrative of it didn't happen because it was a mistake, therefore this is fake news. Now, it wasn't fake news. It was a walking back of an unpopular policy. But my point will always be that the real victims are the conservative writers, because these mass walkouts of PayPal by conservatives mean that the young writers coming up have been demonetized. And it's all well and good for everybody who's got platforms and salaries to say, let's punish PayPal, but there are no alternatives. And so I'm concerned that in a year we're going to turn around and be, well, where are the young writers? Where are the culture warriors? And it's like, well, they've gone to work in Coles because there's nothing that they can do to support themselves. So please, let's change the law to make sure that these companies cannot play politics, because the next thing it'll be a bank and you'll have your interest rates go up as soon as you buy a burger. So it's not going to stop here.
No, you've pointed out that this, as you say, this stuff only goes one way. So, for example, there was a group called Gays for Groomers that PayPal took against, but PayPal, because those are gays who opposed gays against sorry, I got the wrong name there. Gays against groomers. That's how out of it I am. They're opposed to the grooming, but fellas who are attracted to children did not receive the same treatment from PayPal.
No, of course not. If you're maybe considering flirting with the idea of pedophilia, well, PayPal's okay with that because you're seeking help. But if you're against that move and if you want to protect children, well, clearly you're a threat and you have to be removed. This idea of misinformation and disinformation has been used as all these policies to let them circumnavigate normal banking policy, and real banks are now taking a leaf out of PayPal's book and starting to cancel accounts in the real world. Now, this cannot be allowed to happen because the big tech, great reset people, this is what they want. They want to control your purchasing power via your social media accounts. So it has to be brought to attention. We can't just write it off as a social media trend.
Well, just to pick up that last point, you know, the idea that Lloyds and NatWest and Barclays would actually freeze your accounts because they don't like your opinions. Andrew Lawton is with us, and that actually happened after the Canadian truckers.
Yeah, Justin Trudeau was like the OG PayPaler because he just went after anyone that was protesting his government and said, we're going to suspend your ability to bank. And it wasn't just your ability to put money into this protest that was making him look bad, but it was people couldn't get lines of credit. They couldn't make their mortgage payments. They couldn't buy their groceries, all because of their political views. Just their banking right was vaporized overnight.
Yeah, we had a guy on the show who tried to use his debit card for like $27 at the grocery store, and it didn't work anymore. Now, just quickly, Andrew, did Justin actually take his foot off those guys' throats? Are those accounts unfrozen now?
The accounts were unfrozen, but a lot of people have a permanent flag on their account, and I've heard from a number of them that have tried to get new lines of credit, for example, or they've tried to move to another bank, and they're denied the account because the banking industry now has, courtesy of Justin Trudeau, this permanent reason to say, oh, these guys are bad news.
Alexandra, it's actually incredible that that is happening. You know, I touched on the beginning of the show that something's gone badly wrong, because it used to be the Continentals who were the crazies among Western powers. They fell for all this stuff. Right now, it's His Majesty's Dominions which are actually in the lead of the craziness. Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK. Can this be arrested and turned around?
Well, you know, Trudeau said the quiet parts out loud. He's the guy who looked at Chinese communism and thought we might be able to do that with a Canadian flair. But the answer is we can if we had some people in power who actually cared. Instead, even our Conservatives are pushing us towards a fully digital economy because they like the idea of controlling society. We have politicians with no moral substance, no ethical value whatsoever, and so they are not protecting us from this push, this international drive by bureaucracy and corporations to control our purchasing power. I mean, people think, why would you do this? And so because there's 9-odd billion customers in the world, they'd like to quite control what we do. So my answer is yes, we can change it, but we're going to have to find some real politicians first. And I'm not seeing a lot of Churchills around. I'm seeing a lot of Trudeaus.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it is bad. But it was good that at least PayPal was so humiliated that this stupid fact-checking organisation is now denying it ever happened.
That was my favourite part. Their misinformation policy was misinformation, but I'm still waiting for the $2,500 check in the mail from PayPal. I'd like to know why we didn't get that back.
Right. Actually, PayPal should fine themselves $2,500 for peddling the misinformation. She talks a lot of sense. Liz Truss, if you're watching, fly Alexandra into Heathrow and make her chairman of Ofcom. We need to get rid of that Michael Grade bloke, because Alexandra would come on the show and debate these things. Thank you very much, Alexandra Marshall, the Ofcom chairman in waiting, and thank you also, Andrew Lawton. We might get him a job there. He might be a deputy assistant under vice president or something over there. We can get him that, I think. Let's stump it out. Oh, what do we got here? Barry says, is it true that the only people who watch your show are either gullible QAnon-believing anti-vaxxers or white supremacist racists? Well, there must be a ton of those QAnon anti-vaxxer, supremacist, racist, believing in the space lizards or whatever the theory is, because we're kicking butt in the ratings. We had 3.5 times the audience of Piers Morgan last night. Mr. Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch, has lavished 110 million quid on that show and has nothing to show for it. That's why he could no longer afford Jerry Hall. He could afford Jerry or Piers. One of them had to go. That's going to do it. Mark Dolan is here. He could have cut in line like Philip Schofield, but instead he's been waiting patiently with British television's stiffest upper lip. What do you got, Mark?
Well, Mark, talking about money. Listen, you are worth every penny, worth your weight in gold. What a brilliant show, Mark. We pick up the baton at 9. Does Britain need a general election? Also, woke transport bosses banning problematic words. Should royals do reality TV? Is it wrong to call women crazy, even if they are? And in my digest, UK lives beyond its means. So lots to get through. A very, very busy show at the start of the programme. Before the news, I'll be laying out my thoughts on the vaccine. Never forget, never forgive, and never again.
Absolutely. And by the way, I love those crazy chicks. So if they're totally nutso, do feel free to pass them along to me. I can't, you can't miss with a bunny boiler. Just a bit of advice from me. All coming up after the weather. Stay safe, stay free.
Good evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow looking pretty good for most places. If you're after a dry and bright October fare, it will be fairly damp and misty across much of the south, and some more wet and windy weather will be arriving in the far northwest, courtesy of these weather fronts arriving from the Atlantic. This one is currently with us and it's just slowly dribbling its way southwards, and it will bring more cloud and drizzly rain across parts of southern England and South Wales overnight. A few showers elsewhere, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England will eventually turn dry and clear. And with light winds here, it's going to turn quite cold. Temperatures even in urban areas down to 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. So in the countryside, there will be some pockets of frost, but we're well above freezing in the far south. But it will be quite a grey, misty, murky start for much of the Midlands, southern England and South Wales. I think along the south coast of England, it'll stay fairly cloudy for much of the day, with likely to see further outbreaks of rain just running from west to east. So a bit damp and drizzly here. But as I said, for many places, dry and a bright day with some sunshine. It will turn wet and windy across the Highlands and the Western Isles late in the day. In the sunny spells, temperatures mid-teens, so round about average for the time of year. Through the course of the evening, I think we'll continue to see this rain across the south, perhaps affecting the southeast a little more during the evening time. The rain in Scotland will push south, followed by another band of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go through the early hours of Friday morning. Quite blustery here too. Friday's, again, a real mishmash with further pulses of rain across the south and a lot of cloud. A band of rain sinking south across the north. Either side of that, there'll be some sunny spells, but with blustery showers in the far northwest. Again, temperatures likely to be close to average come the afternoon. Feeling pleasant if you get a bit of sunshine, but not feeling too clever if you're stuck with the cloud and the outbreaks of rain.